Hi, Achim from InnerSpace Explorers. I know I'm late with the submarine, which is in the workshop, but yeah, no time so far. And I owe you guys episode 3 of the Testers project. Reason I'm late is that my wife and my kids are COVID positive and are in quarantine, which means I moved out because I'm negative and I want to keep it like that. But I don't have access to all my stuff at the moment, and I haven't been in the storage locker, and I don't have the logbook yet, so yeah, we have to postpone that for a week. Nevertheless, I have a little bit of a teaser for you. Here's the picture of Bjarne. I'll obviously cover that in episode 3 in all details, but yeah, just to give you a little bit. And at the same time, I would like to ask you to please share this project in your social media so we can reach more people and get this going. And at that point, if you like my content, please hit the like button and the notification bell, subscribe to my channel, and yeah, if you want to share my content, I really appreciate that. So today we want to talk about cold water diving. I get so many questions, and over the time the channel exists, it was a repetitive thing like, how do I prepare myself for cold water diving? How do I get into cold water diving? What gear, freezing regulators, dry gloves, etc, etc, etc. So I thought I'd do a little bit of a sum up about cold water diving and certain steps. So we'll talk about preparation today, equipment for cold water diving, and a little bit behavior in the water. And as always, if you have questions, comments, put them in the comment section. And if you want to discuss things in detail, check out the Patreon site. That's where I normally answer all the questions in detail. So let's get into it. Number 1, preparation. If you're cold when you go on a cold water dive, you'll be really miserable. So that's the key of preparation, and we'll talk about a couple of points. So one is nutrition. Take a lot of carbs before. If you've seen the documentation about my channel dive, I had a big plate of pasta at 3 o'clock in the morning before I started the dive. And if I go cold water diving here in winter or anything like that, I try to get a reasonable amount of carbs in before. That usually helps my body to maintain a certain temperature, so to speak. The next important thing is don't freeze up front. I can remember so many miserable cold water dives, especially when I was diving with students, when I was teaching, and this guy has a question, here something's not working, here we have to fix the hose configuration, here we have to do this, and you're running around in snow, on ice, you're out of the car, and suddenly you're like, oh God, I'm cold already. And then you go into a cold water dive, that's not gonna work. So that's simply wrong. Obviously the instructional thing is different from your private diving, but if you go on a private dive, make sure you're warm. So what I do today, for my company, I have a big Sprinter van with a proper extra heating, which means I don't have to have the engine running, but I can still heat the car, I can stand in there, so that's a perfect setup. If you have a van or something like that, and you can gear up in there and make sure you're not out in the cold before the dive, that helps tremendously. If you don't have that, you can still take proper preparation up front at home, have your gear examined, for example, instead of standing outside in cold rain, cold snow, whatever, and then start to assemble your gear in the trunk of your car while the car is open. It's much nicer if everything's set up at home and you just have to get into your gear and go. Stay dry. Next thing. Living in Germany was miserable weather most of the time, basically. If your undergarment is already wet or at least damp before you go in the water, or it's wet and damp because you sweat before, you will be cold afterwards. So really try to avoid that. Get all your gear ready, get everything done, and then last step is get in your dry underwear, get your dry suit on as soon as possible, and then go in the water, and not the other way around. Especially, for example, in summer, I see that a lot. I mean, you do a deep dive here, trimix dive, which always means 4 degrees water, so close to freezing, and outside it's 30 or something like that, and people get into their dry suit, and then they start to change something on the gear and chat with somebody, and then they're soaked in sweat, and then they go in the water. Same thing, doesn't work. So I would like to quickly talk about argon, and I put it on purpose into the preparation. You know the concept about filling your dry suit with argon instead of air or trimix or whatever you dive to stay warmer, which there's a lot of placebo, let's take it like that. And I personally do not believe in it, especially if you only take that small argon bottle and take that on the dive. That doesn't make any difference at all. So if you want to use the benefit that argon has, you would have to have a big argon bottle in your car or on the boat or whatever, and then flush your suit at least 3 times, which means you empty it out, you squeeze it, then you fill it with argon, you squeeze it, you fill it with argon, and do this 2 or 3 times so that all the air is out of your suit and it's replaced by argon. And then you go in the water, and then the gas you add for buoyancy and comfort, so you don't get a squeeze, that's pure argon as well, but that means you're in an argon environment. If you have your suit on, it's just normal air in it or whatever, and then you just add a little bit of argon, that doesn't do you any good at all. So if you want to dive argon, you need to flush the suit before, and that means preparation. Next topic is the gear. So if you dive real cold water, you want to have redundancy in your gas supply, which means you need 2 independent first stages. I think I talked about this in another video before. 2 independent first stages should mean 2 independent gas sources. If you take a single tank with an H valve or something like that, and you have 2 first stages on that, and you have a freezing first stage, which in the first place is very unlikely, but if it happens, you'll have a solid ice ball on that first stage, and that cold will transfer into the second first stage, and that will freeze up relatively soon afterwards. The other thing is, why do I have a freezing regulator? Well, normally there's something wrong with the gas, it's not dry enough or something like that, or you got water in the tank or whatever. So it's way more likely that the issue that caused the first stage to freeze also causes the second first stage to freeze. So you want to have independency, which means at least a set of doubles. And if you're a recreational diver and you're like, I don't want doubles, I'm not into technical diving, you can still dive a double 7 or a double 7.5 or whatever, or 8 point something, what's on the market. So small double setups, which, I mean, if you normally, let's say, dive a 15-liter tank and you dive 2 7-liter tanks now, that's around about the same, and it gives you all the freedom that you can separate these tanks, and the first stages are relatively far apart from each other, which will add safety into your dive. So dry gas, I talked about it before. If you have a bad gas source, meaning some kind of shady dive shop, whatever, bad compressor, and you get moisture in your gas, that's what makes the regulator freeze. I have all these discussions about diaphragm or piston first stages and what's good for cold water diving. There is a video, and I'll put the related videos from the channel in the description of this video, where we talk about that. And in fact, because I get a lot of questions like, hey, you're a cold water diver and I see you diving these scuba regulators, why don't you use a diaphragm? And that's not the point. I cannot remember when I had a freezing regulator last time, and that's not because it's a piston stage regulator or it's a diaphragm regulator. It's always either the gas or the maintenance of the first stage or some other stupidity, which I'll cover in a minute. So just make sure you have a proper regulator. I mean, today there's no real bad regulators out there anymore, but make sure you have a well-maintained, up-to-date regulator and dry gas, and then you'll be fine. Especially once you start adding helium, which is a good topic for another video. We need to talk about helium in open circuit diving at some point. But for now, if you have helium, you will not freeze it anyway, because the helium actually prevents that quite nicely. So the next thing is the undergarment. And no, I will not give you any recommendations by this or that. It needs to fit you. It needs to fit your kind of diving. It needs to be compatible with your dry suit. So there's plenty of good undergarments out there. For me, the key was always to have multiple layers. So instead of putting on one thick undergarment that's like this solution, I prefer to have 2, 3, 4 layers of undergarment, which also actually helps if you get wet for some reason. Normally the first layer absorbs most of it, and then the second, so it's possible that the inner layer is still kind of dry. So my experience is that this helps you to cover any issues, or to help you in case you have any issues with a leak, instead of having one big heavy undergarment. Then always the question, neoprene or trilaminate. There's also a video about this. If I dive in the winter and I dive shallow, like with my oxygen rebreather, or if I go metal detecting or something like that, I really like to dive with neoprene dry suit. Simple, fast, easy, and it's the warmest dry suit that's available. I have all of these Poseidon dry suits with the attached hood. It's perfect. I can actually jump in there basically in my underwear and still be 40-50 minutes in 4 degrees water, and I have no issues at all. Obviously that's not suitable for deep diving, because the neoprene gets crushed, you lose buoyancy, you lose the isolation, and then obviously we want to use a trilaminate suit. But if you're a shallow water diver and you dive only cold water, a neoprene dry suit can actually be quite a nice piece of gear. So the next, and that's probably the most important one, is the hood. So we lose a significant amount of body heat through our head, especially if you have full hair like me. That's really a lot of heat that you get into the water of your head. And so the question is always what type of hood, because there's a lot of things that come into play. First of all, it needs to fit you. There's so many hoods out there that do not fit, and that's not because it's a bad hood, it just doesn't fit my or your head. So you have to really play around, and not necessarily the hood from the manufacturer that delivered you the perfect dry suit is also the perfect hood. And then I have a nice example here. So that's, for example, and it's not about the manufacturer, but if you watch these hoods, you actually see that this one will not cover my forehead really nicely. If you they're both at the same height at the chin, and this one actually goes farther down. So which means this one will go up to here, it will cover my forehead, while this ends around here. So my forehead is unprotected. And so that's why I wouldn't use this one. Second, this has one of these necks, and you've seen this, they tend to fit. Normally the idea is you put it under the ring, on the neoprene ring that comes around your suit, but normally these things fold up and they're not underneath, and then yeah, actually you get water coming in here. I hate this type of hoods. Again, it's not about the brand, that every manufacturer has one of these, but I can't dive these. I find them horrible. So I prefer this with open style neoprene on the inside, and that really sits nice on my neck. And for me it's important that it really goes all the way down to my eyebrows, and the lower part really comes up all the way to my lip. And then at the same time, a lot of times you have these hoods that make this, so you have water coming in here. It's also a very sensitive point, and that can be super uncomfortable. So you really need to make sure that the hood really seals all the way around here, and you have no water going underneath the hood. So you have to test that. Another thing is the thickness of the hood. So this is a 9 and a 5, so that's 9mm and 5mm. You can actually see that. I don't know if you see it in the camera. So the upper part here is all 9mm. It's really thick material, and the lower part, which is the one that needs to be stretchy because you have to put it over your head, is 5mm material. That's a great idea, but it doesn't work for me. So I really have issues with this hood because it really blocks my jaw. So I always have the feeling that it's hard for me to open the mouth. I really have to force the regulator into my mouth, and I don't like that. So I actually dive, I think, a 5 and a 7. Yeah, that's the compromise. In summer I dive a 5mm hood, and that's my winter hood. That's 7 all the way around here and 5 here, and that's way more stretchy than the 9mm. It's still very reasonable from the temperature, but it's also very comfortable, so I don't get a sore jaw. And That brings me to the last piece of kit, and that's the ice hood. I don't know if you've seen this. I've been looking in the basement, but I couldn't find one. That's like a complete hood that covers your face, and you only have your eyes cut out and your mouth cut out. So there's no real, I mean, the eyes then are covered by the mask. And then you just have the hole around your mouth where the regulator goes in. That's generally a good idea, and I know a lot of divers that can dive this. I can't. I just hate it. If I have this thing on and then a normal hood on top of that, I can't open my mouth anymore. It presses here against my my blood vessels, and I find it super uncomfortable. But if you can handle that, or if you find a really thin one, if you find one, drop me a message. I'm looking for one. It would be awesome to check that out, like a 1 millimeter or something like that. Super stretchy, that could be good. I never found one, and I find this uncomfortable. Check it out. It's not an expensive one. If you can handle it. I know people that are super comfortable and super happy with that. I've never been, but I thought it was worth mentioning that there's something like that outside. I put a picture of one here as I didn't find mine. Alright, then the dry glove. There's a video about it. That's the system I use. That's the CTEC Antares system. So instead of the seal, I put the glove in here, and then I click it into the suit. I love the system. It's really great, of good grip. But these dry gloves have no isolation at all, so that's just to keep you dry. And so you need a proper underglove, and there's a lot of trash on the market. So a lot of dry glove manufacturers send gloves with the undergloves with the dry glove, and I never found one that I found really good. So I'm buying these. That's actually from Winter Sports, and the first thing that you can see, they really fit. So I have no loose ends on my fingers, because sometimes you have this issue here and then you can't clip any bolt snaps. So if I put that on, it actually fits my hand perfectly. And then even if I put that glove on, my dexterity is really good. I can handle bolt snaps, line, whatever. So for me, that's the perfect solution. And same thing, you need to shop for proper fit, and I'll see if I find a link for these so you can check them out. I don't get anything from that, no percentage, whatever, so no worries. I'm not trying to sell you anything, but for me that's the best underglove I ever experienced, and if I find it, I put a link in the description of the video as well. The last thing, heating. My experience, the last time I used the heating was when I was preparing for my channel dive, and every single time I had a dive where I needed it, it didn't work. Broken cable, issues with the battery, this and that, it was terrible. So I decided I don't want that, because the issue with the heating is it makes you, at some point it makes you rely on it. For me it's a little bit like an electronic rebreather. People are lazy, so you start to rely on the computer, on the electronics, etc. And the same goes with the heating. Like, oh, this is comfy and warm. So you go in the water, you flick it on, and then I have a nice dive. So if you have that nice warm dive and then you go into decompression and it fails and your blood vessels get cold, you can actually have a serious decompression issue. So the only thing that would make sense is to start the heating when you start your ascent and your decompression, to then have additional warmth and actually benefit from that also with your decompression. For me that never worked. But as I said, 2012 was the last time I was really looking into the topic. Since that I always found ways around it, and with Undergarment, etc., or I just simply suffered through it, which is probably also not the smartest. So I have to look at some point what's on the market, what I like, what works. I'm sure there's super nice products on the market. A good friend of mine recently told me he has one and is super happy, but I don't want to really get into certain companies here and promote whatever unless I haven't tried it myself. So probably a heating test is something that will come up in the future. But yeah, be aware that it can be a nice add-on, but it's nothing that I would really rely on, at least not at the moment. So the next and last point of the cold water diving thing is what do I do in water? The first thing, and that I see a lot, is people breathe, that it's freezing cold and people breathe the regulators out of the water. What happens is that the moisture that you exhale actually condenses on the regulator, in the regulator, and it freezes, and then you have these little ice particles in the second stage which can actually make it freeze. So you breathe it on land, you go in the water and you have a frozen regulator, and I see that actually a lot. So that's a no-go. So if you dive in freezing cold temperatures, you go in the water and you breathe your regulators only underwater. That's the first thing. The second thing is put your face in the water. So when we go diving and it's a bit colder, I always, before I put my mask on, I lay my face in the water for 30 seconds or so. So if you're a cold water diver, you know that feeling. You go in the water, put your mask on, put your regulator, and you go in. It feels like there's 1,000 pins like cutting in your face. And if you put your face in the water and relax a little bit, it calms down your breathing and this nose water reflex. That actually will make a more comfortable start into the dive. And if then for some reason you take off the mask or you get water in, it's way less stress. So it's something that I highly recommend. And the last thing is move. For myself, as I said before, when I'm teaching, for example, we do a basics of exploration and I have 2 or 3 students and I show the exercise and then I'm just hanging there and watching them doing the exercise. I get so cold and it's something I really, really hate. That's why I really try to teach in warm water, because it's really uncomfortable. And if I just go diving privately and I just start swimming and move around, it's way better. So then an hour is no problem. If I'm teaching and just hanging there watching students, usually after half an hour I'm super cold. So there's a huge difference in that. So yeah, keep moving and stay warm. So again, if you have questions, comments, put them down there. I can't answer them all, so that's why I have the Patreon page where I spend a lot of time and discuss with people in detail. Check it out. There's a link at the end of the video. Other than that, stay safe and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.